Okay, can y'all hear me? Microphone all working? Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started. So let me turn off Spotify. For those of you who aren't aware, this is our JavaScript workshop. I hope y'all were here for the HTML and CSS workshop because we're just gonna build up from what we had last week. If you were not here, I highly recommend that you go back later. There is a recording for that on the 1 Month Resources channel, and it's on our YouTube. It's just a walkthrough of everything we did last week to the point that we're going to start at now. But if you were not here and you want to still follow along, I did post the index.html and the style.css files in 1 Month Resources as well. So feel free to go install those files so that you've got everything we had from last week. And if you were not here last week, go and click on the HTML and CSS notes. So if I pull up Discord, here's our resources. These were the notes we used last week. Go here if you were not here last week, and there's some instructions about what you need to set up in terms of like the file structure. It's really just any folder, and you make a new folder for assets, and you've got these 3 files. But again, I gave you index.html and style.css if you do not have those for today. But otherwise, I'm going to assume that y'all have it, and we're just going to continue working on it. And just like last week, there's another site, JavaScript notes, that I linked, and it looks pretty much the same as the one from last week, and we're just going to keep going from where we left off. So is everyone good with that, or does anyone need a minute to set up to catch up?
Can you come over here for a second?
Can I what?
You come over here for a second. So I'm not further going. I came over here to see where you're all going to do, since I was kind of interested in seeing how you do all this with JavaScript. So what do I do?
So are you a part of our Discord?
No.
Okay, so go ahead and scan to get into our Discord. And all of the resources for what we worked on last week and what we're going to work on today, literally the entire workshop is going to have all the resources on there. So if you were not here last week, like I said, you can go back and watch the recording and just catch up. And it'll kind of make more sense. But for the sake of following along for today, you are welcome to just get our index.html file and style.css file and kind of build off from there. Does that make sense? Okay. But go ahead and scan that if you haven't already. Anyone else need the QR code? Okay. So like I said, go ahead and pull up this JavaScript page, and kind of like we did last time, I recommend doing like a little split screen type of thing, so you can have all the notes on one side, and then you can have our VS Code on the other, so that we can kind of follow along with the notes and then what we are working on. And I'm going to go ahead and maximize this because I'm going to go over some notes before we get started. So take a minute, set that up, and I'll keep talking while we go. So again, like last week's website, information site, I have a link back to that HTML CSS site. So if you need that easy access, you can click there and get back. Again, table of contents, just to make your life a little easier. How to use this site. Again, it's the same as last week's, so you can click there and see that. And again, I put some resources. I think I put all of the 1 month resources, of recommended sites, on the HTML CSS page, but I put specifically the JavaScript ones here, so it's easy access. But without further ado, we'll go ahead and look at the basic like syntax for JavaScript. So JavaScript is a lightweight interpreted just-in-time programming language. And that just-in-time just means that it's compiled during execution, not before, which is a really powerful feature because that lets us have like a dynamic website where anytime the user is interacting with it, it is reacting to that live in the browser. And yeah, dynamic rather than static web pages. So you are more than welcome, and I will make a big note, you are more than welcome to make your 1-month project just plain HTML and CSS. Do not feel like you have to use JavaScript, because for your site, you might not feel like there's any need. If you're making like a personal portfolio site, you might just want it to have your information there, and that is perfectly fine, and I really encourage you to do that. But if you would like to add a little extra flair to it, JavaScript is how you're going to be able to do that. And again, works well with HTML. It allows us to change HTML elements and attributes, which is really the most powerful feature, which is how we're going to be able to like make the website change as the user is interacting with it. We're going to go into like some of the syntax. So the first one I've got here is a comment. Like a lot of languages, it's using 2 backslashes for our comments. And then our kind of print line for JavaScript is going to be console.log. And then we've got the open and close parentheses with a semicolon at the end. So JavaScript will have the semicolons. In this case, I just printed out a string hello world. And one thing that's really important to note about JavaScript is that when we're saying console log, it literally means we are printing this to the console. So if you were to like inspect a page and ignore the junk here, because we don't care, you can see there's a console button up here. And this is where anything that you're printing to the console would go. It's not going to print onto the screen here. So that's just an important note to make. And that's really useful for debugging, and we are going to use it as we are working on our JavaScript function so that we can kind of like see what's going on while we're writing the code. And then over here, we've got a couple of variable declarations and just some basic math. Notice that there's 3 different variable types. We have a var, let, and const. And each of those have different uses. For var, that's something that you really want to avoid. That's like pre-2015 JavaScript. So unless you are trying to work to like support older browsers, I would just say avoid var. But I gave the example there just in case. Then we've got const, which is short for constant. So that means that the value for that variable is not going to change. So this x is always going to be a 5. And then const y, that y is always going to be 6. And then after that we have let, which you're probably going to use more often for something that's going to be dynamic. So let z equals x plus y. So the value for z can change. We can like later add z equals 2, and it's going to let us. But if we have a const, it's not going to. So in general, when to use var, let, and const, try to use const for anything that doesn't need to be changed, just as a basic like best practice. If a variable doesn't need to be changed, don't let it be changed. That goes into like security reasons and all of that, but just as a general rule. And always use const if the type should not be changed as well. So you don't want an array to become a string or something like that. And then use let if you can't use const. In general, you're going to find for anything dynamic, you're going to use let. And then again, only use var if you must support older browsers. So we are not going to have any var usage in our project, but it's there so that you guys are aware it exists. And then you're also going to notice there are no types. If you don't like that there are no types, I highly recommend you look at TypeScript. I personally love TypeScript because I like types. JavaScript will not really cause a whole issue with you changing the type of variable. But but that can also be a big downside because if you're having a change in type, it's not going to warn you, and then it might have like an issue later on. So there are pros and cons to it. It's quick for development, but you're sacrificing some like easy debugging later to be able to see where the issue is. So again, if you really do care about having types, look at TypeScript, and I linked that right there. So that's pretty much all like the basics for JavaScript. We're gonna see that, we're gonna go through and like as we do them, we'll see how you declare a function, how you do if and else statements, all of that. We'll just kind of do that as we go along. But you're gonna find if you've done like Python, if you've done really any other language, most languages are the same if you haven't picked up. It's just a matter of seeing what the syntax is. But we still have for loops, still have if else statements, unlike HTML and CSS where we were not working with programming languages. And with that, we're going to go ahead and get started actually putting code in. So I'm going to go into the project. I made a note in the Discord and on the HTML CSS site that when you are debugging, make sure you are on this index.html file. Otherwise, it's going to like give you like a weird issue, and it's going to pull up your launch.json, which we don't care about. So just go to index.html and run and debug from there. Let's pull it up here. I think I did mess it up already. I shouldn't have shown y'all that example. So yeah, don't try it.
So,
Uh-huh.
to hit, click on 5.
I just opened it. We're open
Run it.
where?
Oh, wait.
I just deleted the launch.json.
Oh.
It was just trying to look for something. Anyways, yeah, if you accidentally tried it, just like delete that launch.json because we don't need it. But this was the site that we finished with last time. So everything UI-wise is already there. We are just going to make it actually calculate. So before I actually get into the code, I'm going to try and give a brief explanation of like what we're calculating. And I assume most of you are already familiar with it from having calculated your own cost of attendance. So some of the things we took in are whether or not you're a resident. That's important because resident and non-resident hourly rates are different. It's going to cost more if you're a non-resident. And same for like the full-time. Once you hit like 12 to 18 hours, that price stays the same, but it still is going to be different whether or not you are a resident. So that's what this option is going to help us calculate for. We've got all of these options, which are the number of credits you're taking within each college. So say I'm taking 3 within arts humanities, and I've got like 9 College of Science. That's me personally. Not only is this total that we're going to get here going to tell us how many hours we've taken so that we can see whether or not we're full-time, it's also going to help us see what the fee is that we're paying for each college. So I think for College of Science, the fee per credit hour is like $40. So those are the 2 things that we're getting out of this section. And then we've got the meal plan option. So it kind of like says the amount right here, like how much you're paying. So we just need to know which option of meal plan you are paying for. And then there's Honors College and our parking permit. So for Honors College, I think the fee last I checked was like $220 per semester. So we need to know whether or not we need to add that fee on here. And same with the parking permit, that's I believe $140. So whether or not we need to add a parking pass on here. And then with that, there's also infrastructure fees. That is calculated based on the total number of hours we're taking again. So if this case I'm taking 12 credits, I think it's about 22 per credit hour. So that's where we're going to get our infrastructure fee. honors college, meal plan, and then again tuition. Tuition we are calculating based on whether or not you are a resident and then how many credits you're taking. So in this case, I would be a full-time resident. So that's how I'm going to determine what my tuition is. Does all of that sound good? If it doesn't make sense completely about why things cost like that, you can go and ask financial aid or the bursar. But that is a very, very general calculation. So there are extra fees that will show up. Don't like quote me or this project on why your fee is different than what you calculated on here. This is just for the sake of the workshop to like get through the concepts. But that is what we are going to work on. So going ahead to get started, I'm going to go ahead and open up functions.js first. And you're going to see the first section here is this like skeleton code. So it's just a bunch of constants you see. So go ahead. There's a copy button right here. You can just go ahead and click that and just paste it into functions.js and save it. And go ahead and keep index there so that whenever we're running, you make sure to run from index. But what we've got here is just, like I said, all of these are just constant values. So like we said, the value for these variables are not going to change. And these are all like set fee, like hourly fees that we're going to use for our calculation. So for honors college, we said if you are, it's going to cost $220. The parking permit costs $140. These are all the meal plans here. And up here we've got resident hourly is $430, resident full-time, and then we have non-resident hourly, non-resident full-time. So the reason we have hourly and full-time is because, again, if you're anywhere between 12 and 18 credits, it's one flat rate. So we'll just make that distinction. And again, college hourly fees, like I said. That sound good to everyone? And if you have questions or you're confused, raise your hand and stop me. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. It wouldn't cause an issue for us. The code is still going to work if you were to like use let or var. But in this case, these values are not going to change. So just by best practice, it's best to leave it as const. From like a security standpoint, you could get into like people could go in and like maybe change the values or try to change the values later. But again, that's like a more complex use case that we don't have to worry about. But again, for best practice, anytime a value doesn't need to change, go ahead and make it a const. That sound good? All right. So we'll go next. We're going to go back to HTML. And notice I did make a note whenever we go back to our index.html. So we're going to switch between these two files so that we're linking everything. So you can see here, there's this script tag with a source functions.js. And it's empty. There's nothing in it, which is fine. Go ahead and copy that. Go over to index.html. And then inside of this head tag, this is where we had all of the metadata from last time. You can go ahead and put it underneath the link. So I'm going to go under here, and paste it, and save. So this is where I put it. And this is essentially acting the same way that we linked our CSS file to our index.html file. So we're saying, hey, there's scripts going on, or JavaScript scripts going on, and those are the source functions.js. So we're just telling it that, hey, we're going to call some functions. This is where they're coming from. And you could, in between these two tags, like define function something, and you could use that later in your code. But for the sake of simplicity, we're going to put all of our functions in a separate file instead of in between this script tag. So if we run it, nothing's going to happen. I'm not going to bother running it because we haven't written any JavaScript really yet. And then we're also going to paste in some extra variables. So go back to functions.js and copy this declare and initialize variables, just big long section, and just paste it like right after the meal plan stuff. And I tried to put some comments in there to like hopefully make clear like what each of like these sections of variables are. And notice here we're using let, and that's because we're going to be changing the state or the value of these variables. So here we've got user resident status, and I'm actually going to run this. You don't have to run this, but I'm going to run it so that I can point to specific parts. So for our isResident, this is just going to be set to a Boolean value, true or false, and we're going to use that here, whether or not the student is a resident. For college credits, we have one for each of the colleges, and that matches with College of Arts, College of Business, etc., etc. And notice how all of these are set to 0 right now, and that matches the default we set here as 0. That's really important so that we're not messing up any calculations. Then we've got our meal plan. By default, we had said to select option 1 by default. So because of that, we're going to set meal 1. And notice this meal 1 is referencing the constant we made up here. So we're setting that is the default. Same with honors college, parking pass. By default, we did not select it, so those are going to be set to false. And then we've got some calculated variables. So we're going to have a total cost of attendance, which is going to be our total right here. Total hours, same as total credits, is going to go here. Tuition, total infrastructure, all of those match to these sections in our chart. So we want to show what the fees are as we're going, and this is where we're going to store those values so we can display them and also, again, perform the calculations. Anyone have any questions about those variables? Okay. All right. I think that's everything for the getting started. So I think now we're going to go ahead and start doing our input handling. So essentially everything on that left-hand column where we had like the buttons, the drop downs, number inputs, all of that, we are going to set up the functions to store those values that the user is inputting into their respective variables that we have here, these let variables. So underneath it, we're just going to go down, and this first section here for JavaScript, go ahead and copy that first for radio input handling, and paste that into your functions.js and save it. So all that we've done here is we've defined a function, and all you have to do is just say function, and you give it the name, in this case toggle resident status, because that's what we're doing. We want, whenever you're selecting one of the radio inputs, to switch between resident and non-resident. And we passed in status. And notice I didn't have to give the type. In a lot of other languages you might be used to saying like int or bool status to be explicit with that, but we do not have to do that in JavaScript. And then this is a pretty short function. A lot of these are going to be pretty short, just kind of like getter functions, setter functions, if you're familiar with that. And all we've done is resident, the variable we've already defined. We're going to set it to status, which is going to be some Boolean value, either true or false. And notice we put this console.log is resident. So this is where I was mentioning that we're going to like debug. So as we're testing it out and switching on the input like resident, non-resident, we want it every time we switch it to print out what the value we switched it to is, to make sure that it's setting it properly. And before we can actually test that, we need to make sure that the index.html knows what we're changing. So in this section here, do not copy these HTML sections, but if you scroll and look at it, and I'll make this a little bigger, you can see there should be sections that are highlighted. I realize they don't look as clear on light mode, and I don't think I can switch that over. That's great. I should have tested in light mode. Anyways, you can very lightly see a blue highlight on this new onClick attribute. So anything that I've highlighted is a new attribute we need to add to those elements. So notice here, we have this onClick toggle resident status, which is the function we just made, and true, because this input is for our resident radio button. Does that make sense? This is on the input element. Anyone have any questions about that? All we've done is we've said onClick, and onClick is almost like an action listener. Again, if you've had experience with any action listener type of use cases, we're saying that when we click on this button, we want to call this function, which is to set the resident status to true. And we did the same thing here for the non-resident button. And we said onClick toggle resident status false. And notice I didn't put any quotes around it because this is a Boolean, not a string. So I'm going to copy this onClick for resident status is true. And I'm realizing I might have to just toggle like this. Okay. And so when I go back to index.html, you can minimize head because we don't need it, and all of this, and go back to where we see form, because all the inputs we're working with are inside of form. So open that one up, and then this first div section here, you're going to see has our input. And you can check because it's going to say ID resident radio. And just anywhere after value, go ahead and put that. The order that you put the attributes in doesn't really matter, but in this case, we're just going to go ahead and put it here. Anyone have any questions about where that one goes? I'll point it out again. It's under our row style, column style for the form, and then there's this first div here with 2 spans. And again, it's going to be an input that has ID resident radio. I'm sorry? You really just need to copy this onClick part and then add it at the very end of this right here. So after value. Everyone got that one? I'm gonna assume that's a yes. We're gonna do the exact same thing, except we're gonna copy for the non-resident. So go ahead and copy that one. And notice we're on this input element where the value is non-resident, or the ID is non-resident radio. I'll go back to VS Code, and just underneath that input is the input we're looking for, non-resident radio as the ID, and just paste that one there. Everyone following for that? Okay. We're going to see if it works. So on index.html, go ahead to run and debug, and then click run. I'm going to make this bigger. And what's going to be really helpful is right click and inspect, and then go to console, like we did earlier. And you're going to see that there's nothing in the console because we didn't print anything yet. But when I go over here to resident and non-resident, whenever I call a function, we had put that console.log, so it's going to print out what that value that we just changed it to should be. So if I click on non-resident, I get false. And it's even showing functions.js line 70. So I can go see exactly in my function where it's printing that out from. If I switch it back to resident, it goes back to true. And I can keep switching it up. If I just click on resident again and again, it's still giving true. It's just adding a number here of how many times. Is anyone not having that work? If that is not working, we need to like fix that now, because we're going to do the same process over and over again from here on out. All right, y'all are so quiet. If you have any questions or something is not working, like I said, just say so and I'll stop. But yeah, that's essentially the idea. We had, for the radio buttons, an on click, we call a function to change the value of that variable. And we're using console log so that we can actively see what that change is as we click. And that is our first input. So we'll move on to the number input handling. This one, there's going to be a lot that we're going to put in there, but it is the same process for each one. So I made a little table of the ID for each HTML element, and then what the JavaScript function is going to be that we're referencing. So again, this is where we have all those number inputs for like how many arts humanities you're taking, how many College of Science, so on and so forth. So over here with the JavaScript section, it's this big long section of functions. Go ahead and copy that. Go back to VS Code and your functions.js and just paste that right underneath and save. And these are all the same function, just different names to set for different variables. Again, if you've done a setter method before, that's essentially what we are making right here, is a bunch of setter methods for each of these variables. So the first one, we had College of Arts Humanities. We said function to define the function, gave it a name, and we are taking in credits. Again, we don't have to put the type, but that is just the number of credits we're getting from that input. And then we set the number of College of Arts Humanities credits. And notice we have a parse int here. So when we send this, if you look in our index.html, I'm going to close this div where our radio was. And then here we have all these input type numbers. If you go here, we have this value attribute, right? And I said, we were going to put all of these last time and we talk about it later. And this is where we're talking about it. So this value is the actual value that is associated with this element. So whenever you go and click, like, you put in 2, you put in 6, or you change the little arrow button to add credits or take down credits, that is changing this value. And we set 0 as the default, so that's why it showed up as 0. So when we're sending this value, which we're about to do in a second, I'll show you where to paste it, we're going to be sending in this value, which is a string. So in order to change it from a string to an integer the way we want for our calculating, that's why we have parse int and credits. And again, console log what that actual value was. So that is just repeated for College of Business, College of Education, so on and so forth. Anyone have questions about those functions? So back to our index.html. This is a little better highlighting, I think, the yellow. We have value equals 0, which we just talked about. And notice it's not always going to be on click because our input of type number is not changing whenever we click on it. It's whenever there's a change in like the value we're putting in that text box. So our action listener, if you want to use that terminology, for this element is on change. And we're calling set number College of Arts Humanities to this dot value. If you've never used this, all that this is saying is reference the object that is this element, which we're already in, and then access its value, which we said was 0. So whenever the value becomes like 6, we're passing this dot value, which is 6. So go ahead and copy that on change. Go back to VS Code. And notice on this, I'm on input type number with ID of fees for College Arts, Humanities, Social Sciences. And I'm just going to paste that. Honestly, I'm going to paste it right after the ID because, again, the order doesn't matter. And for the sake of seeing where I'm pasting it, I'm going to do it there. Everyone good with that? Okay. So we'll go ahead and run and debug for this specific input already. I know we didn't do it for College of Business, so on, but we're going to just make sure that we're doing the right process. So if I go run and debug, and again, inspect, and open up the console, it should also, as a note on VS Code, there's a debug console here where it should also show up, but I find it easier to have it right next to it. So again, if I switch here, we see true, false, changes. And here for College of Arts Humanities, I'm just going to click up on this button, and you can see it printed out 1 because we changed the value to 1. If I click again, it's going to go to 2. And if I just type it in, maybe I'll type in 3, I have to click enter for it to get that change. And if I put in like 2000 or 200, it's also needed 200. We talked about input validation last time, and that something like this you might have to do with JavaScript. You could write the code in there to say if value is greater than, like, say 18 credits, because we set the max at 18. If it's greater than 18, you know, throw an error, like don't let them type past that, you know. But again, for the sake of this project, we won't worry about that. Someone had a question? It's giving an error? Yeah. Can Alex will see what the issue is. Does anyone else get an error? You also have an error? That's weird. I'm just going to send out the leadership people to look at it. Remind me your name, Chloe? Yeah. Anyone else have an issue? Yes? Can you read what the issue is that it's giving you?
Yeah, it's saying AHSS is not defined.
It said CAHSS?
No, it's saying
If something's not defined, we'll go ahead and make sure that you have the function in here properly. And you haven't changed the name when you copied of, where is it? Number, College of Arts Humanities. Is it giving a line error? Like,
actually.
oh, import this part. Go ahead and copy all of this.
Oh, is that what
You
that
did-
was?
Yeah. If y'all didn't already, you need to paste in those these functions here. Otherwise, it's not going to know what it'll say like set number of College of Arts and Humanities is not defined because you haven't defined the function. So make sure you've already copied these and put them in your JavaScript file. Esther, Alex, are y'all good if we move on, or they're not listening? That's fine. Okay. For everyone else, I guess we'll just move on. We are going to do the same exact thing with this on change, but again, I made a list here of all the IDs that we need to assign it to and what their function is. Again, we've already made all the functions here. We just need to call the right one. So go ahead and copy this on change again, and we'll just edit as we go. And I'm going to move this to the side just so I can see the table. So I'll go ahead and go index.html, and for this input where we had ID, and notice this is the ID here, for College Arts, Humanities, Social Sciences, that's where we put our on change. So just underneath it, we have College of Business. So I'm going to go ahead and paste on change right next to it and change the function to set number of cob. And notice because we did this dot value, it knows that we're getting the value for this input element. So we don't need to change that. We just need to change which function we're calling. That makes sense? And go ahead and save that. So if we go down, the next one we have is College of Education. So I'm going to, again, paste that on change. And instead of set number of College of Arts and Humanities, I'm going to put set num College of Education. And make sure you're using the right uppercase, lowercase. So we had to put some lowercase here to distinguish between engineering and education. So check that with the table that I just gave on the side. Save that. The next one, College of Engineering. We'll paste there and set number for College of Engineering. College of Nursing. We paste our on change and set number for CON, College of Nursing. And then finally, our lovely College of Science. Set number for COS. And again, make sure you're using the right uppercase, lowercase for those functions. And we can go ahead, if you finish putting in all of those, go ahead, run and debug. Pull up inspect and console. And we'll check College of Arts Humanities again. If I change it up, we get 1. Down goes back to 0. And then I'll try it for each one. So 1, 2 for College of Business. Everything's working. Just give it like 1 or 2 clicks just to see that it's doing it. And notice, the line here is changing. So 76 is referring to Arts Humanities, and you see it's calling a different line when we're in a different function. So just test that on each of these. Anyone have any issues so far? Yes. You just paste the same on change. You're still going to keep this dot value because it knows to reference the value for this element. What you need to just change is the college. So it knows that you're calling the function to change College of Science or College of Nursing, so on and so forth. Can you say that again? For if you're pasting it for the College of Arts Humanities, that first one, I already wrote it as College of Arts Humanities. I don't know if that's what you were asking. I'm sorry, I can't really hear. Yeah, like I said, I linked that first one right here. If I make it bigger. Like the example I gave here is for College of Arts Humanities. So that one just stays as I put it here. But when you're putting it for College of Business, College of Nursing, those are the ones that you need to change. Just change the function to be the right one. So again, those should match the ID. So for the College of Business input, it's calling the College of Business function. Anyone having any issues at all? All working? Everyone tested, you inspected and made sure that it's actually changing values whenever you click on them? Okay, I'll take that. We'll go on for our select input. That's where our meal plan is. For this one, notice just as looking at the HTML, we had a select option, and there's not going to be the same like on click. This is going to be an on change, just like we had for our number input, because we want to see when does the option that's selected change. That's when we want to call the function to like, hey, we updated it. So this is where we're going to have on change, set meal plan, and then notice we said this dot value again, but there's no value for the select. It's referencing the value from option. So options here are connected to this select. So it knows that when we select option 3, it's going to grab this value here. And remember how last time I said, you know, this value here is not what's being shown on the screen, but it's what we're going to be able to access in our JavaScript. So we're going to send in a 1 through 8 value. So for that section, all you need to do is copy this on change, and then in our index.html, you can close out like this div of the number inputs and see where our select is. And just right after the ID, you can go ahead and paste that function call. We do not have the function in there, so don't test it yet. Everyone good on where we need to put this function? Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. Yeah, it goes on this select where our meal plan stuff is. This select element, you're just going to add this on change attribute. So it should be in the section right underneath where all of our number inputs were. Everyone good? Okay. So now we'll actually go and get the function. So again, the function's right here. You can go ahead and copy that JavaScript, go back to VS Code and our functions, and again, just paste it at the bottom. The order of these functions really doesn't matter for us. And save it. So again, defined a function for setting the meal plan, and we're taking in some OPT, option parameter. And we had to parse this in again, because notice we took it from a string, and we need to convert it to an integer. And I made that note here as like our plan. And all I've got here is just a series of if-else. It's just the normal syntax you would normally see in any other language. We've got open, close, parentheses, and for the sake of like saving some space, because it's only one line within each one, I just put them in one line. It's not like it's doing anything different. I could have just done something like this if it makes more sense to you to see it like this, you're welcome to do that. It doesn't make a difference in the code, but again, for the sake of saving some space. And notice all I did was if meal plan is 1, the option was 1, we set our meal plan variable to meal 1. And this shows up as a darker color in VS Code because it's a constant. So we know that we're referencing the values we already made. So if it's 2, set it to meal 2, so on and so forth. And I believe there are only 8 options. So that's all I've dealt with here. And again, log to the screen that we changed the meal plan. So now that you've actually put in the function, go back to index, run and debug. And again, inspect, open the console. And I'm just going to skip right to it. So here we have option 1 selected. And I'm going to select option 5. And notice here, it printed out 645, which I won't lie, scared me for a minute, and I thought I did something wrong. But that is because that is the value of option 5. So if we wanted to, we could have added also like console.log option, which was the parameter we took in, and we would see that it said 5, which was the actual value like that we put here. But because we set it to 5, let me pull it up. I was printing out the actual meal plan, which that variable is our value. So those values are here. So if I put it back on option 2, it went back to 1925. Option 6, 380. So just make sure that it's doing all those different ones. Is that working for everybody? It won't log anything? Did you go ahead and put the function into your functions.js that we were just looking at, this one? I'm sorry, did you say something? It's in there, and it's not printing anything? Did it have the console log in there? It is. Alex, can you go look at that? Thank you. Mm-hmm. Is it showing an error, or is it just not showing up? What does the error say? Make sure you've done, just as a double check, you've put this function into functions.js, and in our index.html, you added onChange to set meal plan to this .value. Those two need to be there for it to work. Anyone else? Any issues? No, Stucky, like right in front of you. Yeah. Yeah, I'll give you all a minute. Yeah, feel free to run and debug and just, again, inspect, console, just make sure everything's working. We've done resident and non-resident, so that should toggle between true and false. Anytime we change these values, it should print out those values. And then again, for our meal plan option, it should print out the dollar value that we're setting it to. Esther, are y'all good? It's what? So can I move on? Okay. I'll let them deal with that. Okay. Almost done with our inputs. And then we're just going to have a bunch of calculating that we're going to copy and paste. So our next one is the checkbox. That's going to go for our honors college and parking pass. So if you're looking at the HTML, we have two inputs. This one here with ID honors college. And what we're going to add, another action listener, and this is on change because this is changing the value of whether it's checked or not. And notice we talked about this last time that for the checkbox, there's no value attribute. What it's going to go off of is whether or not there is a checked Boolean attribute. So it would just say straight up checked. It wouldn't say checked equals something. And if it's not checked, you just don't put it in there and it evaluates it as false. So we don't see any here because they are false by default, but when we're saying set honors or set parking, we're saying this dot checked. So whether or not it is there. And if someone clicks on it and you were to check the HTML, which actually we'll do in a second, we'll see that it pops up. So go ahead and copy for these inputs on change. Go to VS Code in your index.html. I'm going to close the select. And then where this input with ID honors college, input space and on change for set honors. This is where we're putting it. And same thing we're going to do for parking. I'm going to copy the on change and set parking. And this should be just the checkbox right below it. So if I go down to this input where ID is parking permit, we're going to paste our on change there. And make sure you did copy this, don't use the same one. We want to call set honors here and then set parking. They will both be this dot checked. Save that. Everyone got that? Okay. And so then, if we go to the JavaScript block here, you can go ahead and copy those functions. And again, just paste it at the bottom of functions.js. Nothing too different from what we did earlier. We have a function for set honors, take in the option. And in this case, option, it's showing us that is honors is a Boolean. It just determined that from inferring based on what we said earlier. But we're going to set it to option, which for checked is going to be either true or false. Again, we don't have to say checked equals true in HTML or checked equals false. You just say checked or you don't put it. So it will evaluate as true or false. And we'll log that as either true or false. And the same thing for the parking. Everyone pasted that function in. Okay. Now they're so lively. Love it. So if you have pasted in these two functions for set honors and set parking, save it, and you've put on change, oops, don't do what I did. You've set on change for honors and on change for parking, then go ahead and run and debug. And we're going to look at this. We're going to switch between elements and console. So first we'll go to console and check true and false. So if I go to honors college and I check it, it gives me true. Uncheck it gives me false. Same for parking permit. Check, uncheck should be true and false. If that is not working, raise your hand and we will fix it. Okay, so like I said, when we wrote this, we didn't put any checked attribute in the HTML. So when I go ahead and click on honors college and I set it to true, if I go back to elements, and I can do it here and see it live under elements, I can actually, I think, right click on the checkbox and actually I think I can use this little select tool from earlier and click on the checkbox itself, and it pulls up this input right here. And that's where we've got this value. It's actually crazy that now that I try to do it, it's not going to work. So I don't know why it's not doing it here, but in general, maybe it will do it if I had it by default. Don't do what I'm about to do. This is just for the sake of trying to show an example. I just set checked for that input. And if I inspect and I open up this input, I don't want the label, I want the input. There it is. Notice how it says checked here, right? Because it is by default checked. If I uncheck it, I might have to maybe refresh this. I don't know why it's not doing it. In general, on a lot of sites, when you debug it, if you uncheck it, it will actually take off that checked attribute, which would kind of show what I've been trying to say is that either you put it or you don't put it, and that's how it will know. But unfortunately, it's not showing that, so we'll just have to make do. But yeah, as long as both of them are changing true and false for now, that's what matters. Is that working for everyone? Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, I need you to like speak. I can't hear over the AC. It's not giving an error. I mean, it's giving you an error. Esther's gonna help me out. I'm gonna go back and fix my code so it's not default checked. So don't have it checked. Otherwise, it's gonna mess up a lot of things. Because we're assuming by default that it is not checked, and that's how we've set it in the functions. So we're gonna move on to our last input, which is just the submit button. And now we're back to on click like we had for the first one. This one's pretty straightforward, just on click, submit function. We are going to paste this in, and we are not going to make the submit function yet, so don't try clicking on it when you're debugging, because it will give you an error and say submit function has not been defined. So yes, we know it has not been defined, but we're going to go ahead and put this here. So go ahead and copy, and underneath where our checkboxes are, we had our submit button. So you can just go ahead and paste that on click there. If I run and debug, just to show, if I click on submit, it's going to say submit function is not defined. That is fine. We're going to do that in a couple minutes, but just so that the link is there so that when we do define submit function, it will already know to do that. Is that good with everyone? It will give this error.
Where did you put it?
I put this on-click submit function on our submit button. That submit button should be just right underneath your checkboxes. All good on that? And you can see it was printing out the error in this console as well, so if you want to use the VS Code console, it will also work. All right. We're going to go ahead and move on and do all of our calculations. So I'm just going to close this section because I get overwhelmed. For our calculations, we're really just going to paste in a bunch of functions, talk about what it's doing, and that's really it. if you really want a super, super in-depth analysis of what's going on with these functions, I will happily give you one afterwards. But it's more so just understanding, like I went through at the beginning, like how do you calculate cost of attendance? We're just taking advantage of all those inputs that we just made and doing every calculation. So the first one is for total hours. So I'm just going to copy that, VS Code, functions.js, paste it at the bottom. So we're calculating total number of hours, which we're just adding up number for each college, which we already had with those setter functions earlier, and we would test it and it would say like 1, 2, 3. We are just adding all of those values now. And console log total hours. So whenever this function does get called, we will have it print out total hours. And you do not have to copy me, but you're welcome to, because I realized it's not going to look great unless I add it. So also a little fun fact is you can add like a little string. So I'm just going to put total hours and have that, so that when it actually prints it out to the console, we'll know what it's talking about, because I realized it's going to print all of these all at once, and we're not going to know what it's doing. Yeah. Any questions on that function? Just addition. Okay. Our next one, calculate tuition costs. Go ahead and copy that and paste it in the functions.js file. Save it. And so for this function, we're calling calculate total hours, which is what we just defined here. So we're going to make sure that when we're calculating the tuition, we have already gotten the value, because otherwise we wouldn't have set total hours and it's still going to be 0 by default. So we're going to make sure to call that function. And then we've got some if-else statements here. So we're going to check, is the student a resident? Which we've already set with that radio button. And if they are a resident, we want to see, is the total number of hours less than 12 or greater than 18, which would mean that they are not full-time, so they will pay the hourly rate. So that would be total tuition is the total number of hours, which we got from here, times the resident hourly rate. And if they are not between, if they're between 12 and 18 hours, it means they're full-time, so we just give them resident full-time tuition. The same thing in the else statement. The else statement is, only difference is we use the non-resident hourly and non-resident full-time values. That makes sense for everybody? Okay, and again, for this one, I'm gonna put a little note so that we know what's going on. Total tuition. All right. Next section is for calculating fees. Copy that code block, paste it right underneath. I don't know why the formatting came out a little different here. But we're calculating fees, that's our function. I'm just gonna indent here for readability. So we're calculating the fees for each college here. And this is important that they're each their own variable, because we already said we're gonna list out each of those individually in a minute. So all we have is College Arts Humanities. This is a constant, and it tells us, VS Code's really convenient, and it tells us that it's 24 here. If I highlight College of Business and hover, it's telling me it's 27. So we multiply that fee by the number of credits that they're taking in that college. So that's our college specific fees. The next one is for total infrastructure. It's just that infrastructure fee, which is, I believe, 22 times number of hours. That's all that it is. And then finally, for total fees, we're adding each of those individual fees for each college plus total infrastructure fees. And that's what we're going to print out. And I'm going to make that. Any questions? Like I said, mostly just copy and paste right now and explaining what we're doing. And then we've got our calculate total cost of attendance. Copy that one, paste it right underneath. And I don't know why the formatting is showing up so funky, but that's okay. Okay, so for this one, we're calling calculate tuition, which we did up here, which called calculate total hours. And we're calling our calculate fees, which we just did. So we want to make sure that those two functions happen. And then our total cost of attendance is going to be that tuition, those fees, and our meal plan. Don't want to forget that. I almost forgot it myself. And if necessary, we want to add the fees for honors college or a parking permit if they are an honors. So that's if is honors, that's a Boolean, it's just gonna evaluate true or false, and if it is true, it will do it. So that's what these two lines are. I'm gonna make a note here. Any questions? All right. And that's all for like the main calculations that we have. So all we have left is to display all of that information in the table that shows up on that right-hand column. So before we do that, I just want to make a note in our table, which if I save and go over to index.html, I can close this entire form. And then we've got this div column with a table in here. And we don't have to look at each one of them, but last time we made a note that all of these table data elements has an ID. That part is extremely important because this goes back to the beginning where I said we're going to be able to manipulate actual HTML elements so that it shows up. So in this case, we're going to be using this document, which is saying our HTML document dot get element by ID. So we're going to find an element based on its ID value, and in this case I didn't put one. And then dot inner HTML, which is going to say get whatever is inside of here. Or in this case, we're going to like say dot inner HTML is equal to something. So we're going to be able to change what is in here. So right now, most of these are set to $0, but using this get element by ID dot inner HTML, we can say, hey, change that for this element to some new value. And we're also going to have on submit, we'll call the submit function, which will call the calculate total cost of attendance to be able to do all of that. So this is where we are making that submit function. It's going to call all of those calculations, and then we're going to change everything. So just go ahead. This is the last code section we need to copy. We don't need to make any changes to the HTML because last week we already put in those IDs, and we're just going to reference them. So just copy that submit function and paste that at the very end of our functions.js. And I'll walk through on this a little bit. So again, we called calculate total cost of attendance. That's going to do every single calculation, make sure every variable is set that we're going to need to be able to display. And then we're just going to go through and display everything. So document.getElementById, and we gave it total credits. So if I go to the index.html, I know this is a little cramped. I think total credits is actually at the bottom. Yeah, that one actually isn't in the table. It's in this little div that we made, total credits. So we're saying we want to change it. And right now it says total credits 0. So in this case, we're saying equals total credits and credits, hours, same thing. I should have named it the same for simplicity, but that is the value that we're going to put. So we're telling it to change the inner HTML here to be this. Does that make sense? And we're gonna just repeat that with everything. So infrastructure fee shows up here. So get element by ID, infrastructure fee, and we just put the $ because we still need that, and then the fee that we calculated. Same for all of the college fees. We're accessing by the IDs we set here, and same for meal plan, tuition, and the total cost. And notice for honors college and for the parking permit, we check like if they are honors, then we'll change it. If they're not honors, we won't do anything. That sound good to everybody? All right. If that's the case, then we should be able to do this, and it should calculate our cost of attendance. So for the sake of testing it and making sure we're all doing the same thing or getting the right result, we'll all put in the same elements just to make sure everyone's getting the same value. So go to index.html, run and debug. And then for our inputs, let's leave it at resident by default. We're gonna say 3 credits. If you typed it in, go ahead and click enter, just to be safe. I think there might be an issue where if you don't click enter, it's not going to get it, and we're not going to deal with that edge case for the sake of this project. And then for College of Science, we're going to put 9. We're going to calculate my cost of attendance, roughly. So you're going to know all my secrets. So 3, oh, don't save it. I don't know why I clicked that. 3 Arts Humanities and 9 College of Science. And then for meal plan, I am a lovely commuter, so I only have to pay $380. So we're going to click on option 6. And then we're going to go ahead and select Honors College and parking permit. And we're not going to look at the console. We can pull up the console after, but let's just see. It should change all of these values here and our total, as well as this total credits. I know it shows it at the bottom. It should change all of these values to match what we've done and have the proper calculations. So moment of truth, submit. Everyone getting a total cost of $6,496. If you are, you're a winner. So should have 72 here for our Arts Humanities. These College of Nursing, all of that are not going to change. They're still going to be 0. College of Science fee, infrastructure fee, everything should have been calculated. And then total credits should be 12. Did that work for everybody? I guess everyone did already raise their hand. Yeah. Yeah. And look, we did it. We made an entire calculator. Feel free to go through and change some values and submit. So that fee went down for College of Arts Humanities. If I put it on 0, it should go back to 0. And my tuition goes down slightly, but notice now I'm at 9 credits, so my tuition changes. Whereas if I'm at 3, I am full-time, so I pay $50, $60. And if I go up to like 13 credits, that tuition doesn't change because we said that's full-time. I'm actually curious. I don't know if this will do it properly. Yeah. As we were doing this, I realized I made a mistake, and we never reset the Honors College value, so it actually keeps that value here. So anyone see any other mistakes that I made in this project? And then we'll go back and fix that one. But otherwise, I think everything else works properly. It changes all the meal plans and everything correctly. And you can change it to non-resident too to like get those different fees. But we're going to debug on the spot right here for Honors College and the parking pass. So does anyone want to like give any suggestions Does everyone understand the issue that I was pointing out? Yes, no, shake your head so I know. Yes, you see what I did? Okay. So thank you. So I'm going to assume that that's because down here for set honors, just as like a walkthrough of what we did, we set honors to be true or false. We checked that and it did change to true or false. So that value should be correct whenever we're changing it. So it means that the issue is not here. And we can run debug to test that and like make sure that that's actually the case. Like if I check it, it's true, and when I uncheck it, it does go to false. So that's not why it's still staying. But if I go over to, it's not in the total hours, it's not in tuition, and I don't think it's in fees as well. We didn't talk about it there. I think that's total cost of attendance. So here, we said if honors, then total cost of attendance is honors college, and it just added it. So we didn't say if they're not honors, then to change that. So I'm like blinking. So we didn't have that like condition. I wonder if I restart this and I select honors, it's going to give us 220. If I unselect it and submit, it's still 220. If I check it again, I guess it still is 200. And notice also in the console, this is everything we had debugged. So let's see if that's actually affecting the cost. The cost is correct, I believe. So it's more so for displaying this. So because it's only in the display, then we know that it's actually going to be in our submit function at the bottom here, where we said if honors, then put honors college fee. So I'm going to put an else. And I'm going to copy this document by ID and say that it is equal to $0, because that means the fee should be 0. And I'm going to do the same thing for the parking. So else, if it's not, if there is no parking pass, then we want to change that cell to be 0. Does that make sense? All good? I didn't even realize I gave us a live debug session on accident. Okay, now if I run and debug it, I put honors college, we add 220. If I take it off, it goes back to 0. And it should be the same for parking permit. Yeah, so anyone see any other issues that I might have made? If you do, let me know, even if it's after the workshop, and I will correct that, and I'll post an update so that people don't make incorrect calculators. But does anybody have any other questions related to the project, the workshop we just did? No questions? Okay. Well, we did it. We got through a whole site, so yeah. Kudos to y'all. And for coming to all of the workshops to get through it. And for those who are going to watch this after the fact, also kudos to you if you do it. Yeah, so a couple notes before we finish the workshop. The next 4 weeks, I don't know if I can actually pull up my Discord here with our events. The next 4 weeks, we're gonna have code and study with ACM. That is an opportunity if you want to work on 1 month and make your own website. It's kind of a dedicated time that you can come work on it. We will be here to help you if you want suggestions for what to make, how to do something. That is prime time. and that's going to be at 6:30 up in Morton 292. So it's a nice big room. We'll put on like some music, some chill music, and we'll bring snacks. So feel free to come to that. And that will also be on the 26th, October 3rd, and October 10th. And make a note that October 10th, that last one, is the deadline if you are going to participate in 1 month to submit your projects. And we'll talk about submission probably next week, and I'll post some stuff in the Discord about how that will work. But if you are not participating in 1 month, you're still more than welcome to come if you want to just get free snacks, and you can come work on your own homework or your own assignments. It's literally just going to be a chill time. So yeah. Also another note, we have a CS Expo. I made a short announcement the other day. If anyone is involved in research or they've done like some project, you are able to submit that project for our CS Expo. There's like a link to submit, and we will go through it. We're partnering with Cybersecurity Club and ACM Women, and we will select from that pool, I want to say 12 participants, and you'll get to present like a kind of like a 3-minute pitch of your project and what you worked on, and then we'll have the audience vote on the top 3, and if you're voted in the top 3, you will get a certificate from the CS department. So for anyone who's interested, the deadline to submit that is next Thursday. And if you have any questions, come up and ask me after. But yeah, thank you guys for coming out, and I hope that you gained a lot from this workshop. So thank you.
We get it.